The sun hung low over the Nile, turning the sky to molten gold as the scent of frankincense and myrrh rose in thick, curling plumes from the temple courtyards. Priests in linen robes moved with deliberate grace, their hands sprinkling resin and incense onto braziers that crackled with a soft, amber glow. The blue lotus, its petals a deep indigo, floated in shallow pools, releasing a sweet, intoxicating fragrance that seemed to lift the very air into a state of reverent calm. In the bustling streets below, the clatter of pottery and the low murmur of conversation were punctuated by the clink of amphorae. Beer, thick and frothy, and wine, dark as the night sky, flowed freely from taverns to homes, each brew varying in strength to suit the occasion, whether a humble family meal or a raucous festival. Healers and priests, masters of herbal lore, blended herbs and resins into medicinal mixtures, their concoctions promising relief from pain and a gentle easing of the mind. Inside the temple, dim oil lamps threw wavering shadows across walls painted with scenes of gods and mortals alike. Harps and flutes filled the space with a hypnotic rhythm, while the lingering perfume of incense and the faint haze of smoke created a trance-like atmosphere. On festival days, the city erupted in song and dance. Drums pounded, voices rose, and the crowd swayed as communal cups overflowed with fermented libations, each sip a step closer to the divine. Beyond the sacred precincts, elite banquets unfolded in vaulted halls where perfumed oils scented the linens, and the finest wines were poured into crystal goblets. Nobles reclined on plush cushions, their conversations drifting between politics, poetry, and the mysteries of the afterlife, all while the subtle influence of the sacred brews loosened tongues and opened hearts. These rituals were more than mere indulgence. They were a bridge to the spiritual realm. Altered states were seen as pathways to prayer, to dreams that whispered the will of the gods, and to moments of communion that transcended ordinary perception. Wall paintings and papyrus scrolls hinted at these ecstatic experiences, depicting priests in ecstatic poses, cups overflowing, and the faint outline of a deity reaching down to touch a mortal. As night settled, the temple's glow dimmed, and the faithful retreated to quiet chambers. The lingering afterglow of incense and fermented drink settled like a soft blanket, inviting reflection. In the hush, thoughts turned inward, the day's sacred intoxication fading gently, leaving behind a calm that would carry them back into the rhythm of everyday life, forever altered by the heights they had briefly touched. The candle sputtered, casting a wavering halo that made the carvings on the box seem to breathe. Amos lifted the vial, feeling the cool glass against his palm, and let his mind drift back to the teachings of Thoth, the ibis-headed scribe who guarded the hidden knowledge of the heavens. The high priest had spoken of a night when the moon would rise fat and full, its silver light spilling into the inner sanctum, and the chosen would be invited to taste the essence of Kemet, a draught said to dissolve the veil between mortal thought and divine insight. Outside, the city's nocturnal chorus softened, the distant clang of a blacksmith's hammer faded into the rustle of palm fronds swaying in the night breeze. Inside the chamber, a faint hum seemed to rise from the walls themselves, as if the very plaster resonated with the lingering vibrations of the day's chants. Amos set the vial down on the stone altar and closed his eyes, allowing the scent of sandalwood to settle deeper into his lungs. In the darkness behind his lids, stars blossomed across a sky he could not see, each one pulsing with a rhythm that matched the beat of his heart. A soft rustle announced the arrival of an elder, his beard white as the Nile's foam, his eyes bright with the fire of countless rites. "The hour approaches," the elder whispered, his voice a blend of reverence and urgency. He placed a hand on Amos's shoulder, feeling the tremor of anticipation that ran through the younger priest's veins. "Tonight, you will walk the path that few have dared. The brew will not merely open your mind, it will bind you to the river of time where past and future converge." The elder drew back a heavy curtain of woven reeds, revealing a hidden doorway that led down into the bowels of the temple. Torches flickered along the stone steps, their flames licking the damp air. Amos followed, each footfall echoing like a drumbeat in the cavernous silence. The descent seemed endless, the walls narrowing until they opened into a vaulted chamber bathed in a phosphorescent glow emanating from phosphor-laden algae that clung to the limestone. In the center of the room stood a shallow basin of water, its surface still and mirror-like, reflecting the constellations painted on the ceiling. At the basin's edge lay a second vial, identical to the first but filled with a liquid that shimmered with an inner light, shifting colors like the aurora over the desert dunes. The elder lifted the original vial, uncorked it with a practiced twist, and poured a single drop into the basin. The drop fell, rippling outward, and the water began to swirl, forming a vortex that seemed to draw the very air into its center. "Drink," the elder commanded, "and let the currents carry you." Amos hesitated only a heartbeat before lifting the second vial to his lips. The liquid was warm, sweet, and carried the faint taste of lotus and honeyed barley. As it passed his tongue, a surge of sensation flooded his senses. The distant roar of the Nile, the crackle of fire in the hearths, the soft murmur of prayers, all converging into a single crystalline chord. His vision expanded, and he found himself standing on a shore of golden sand that stretched beyond the horizon, where the sky met the water in a seamless curve of light. Figures emerged from the mist, gods and ancestors, their forms both familiar and ineffable. Ankara, the goddess of fertility, extended a hand, her eyes reflecting the stars. "Welcome, seeker," she intoned, her voice resonating in his chest. "You have tasted the breath of Kemet. Now you must choose, to return with the knowledge of the ages or to remain here, forever a bridge between worlds." The vortex in the basin swelled, pulling at Amos's very being. He felt the pull of his home, the soft linens of his chamber, the murmuring prayers of the faithful, and the weight of the vial still warm in his palm. In that suspended moment, the choice crystallized not as a decision of will, but as an understanding of purpose. He would return, but not as the same priest who had entered the chamber. He would carry the fire of the divine within, to guide his people toward a deeper communion with the forces that shaped their world. The water's whirlpool collapsed, and Amos found himself back on the stone altar, the candles flamed steadier than before. The elder stood beside him, a faint smile curving his lips. "The rite is complete," he said, handing Amos the empty vial. "Now you must share what you have seen, lest the knowledge be lost to the sands of time." Outside, the moon rose high, its silver light spilling across the Nile, turning the water into a ribbon of molten quicksilver. Amos rose, his steps sure, his heart echoing the rhythm of the cosmos he had just touched. He knew the path ahead would be fraught with doubt and resistance, but the taste of Kemet lingered on his tongue, a reminder that the divine was not distant. It was a breath away, waiting for those brave enough to inhale it. The dawn broke over Thebes in a wash of amber and gold, and the city stirred awake to the rhythm of market cries and the distant call to prayer. Amos moved through the bustling streets with the empty vial tucked safely in his satchel, its smooth glass catching the first light. He arrived at the Hall of Records, a vaulted chamber where the kingdom's histories were inscribed on limestone slabs, and where the most learned scribes gathered to debate the future. Inside, the council of elders sat in a semicircle, their robes rustling like the leaves of papyrus reeds. At the head of the assembly, the high priestess Nebet rose, her eyes still bright with the fire of the night's revelation. "We have heard your vision, Amos," she said, her voice steady. "Now we must decide how to weave it into the fabric of our people's lives." Amos stepped forward, feeling the weight of countless generations settle upon his shoulders. He placed the empty vial on the stone altar and spoke. "The gods showed me a world where the river and the sky are one, where the breath of Kemet flows through every heart. To keep that breath alive, we must teach our children to listen to the water's song, to read the stars not as distant lights but as guides for the soul." A murmuring rose from the council. The senior scribe Menkaperra frowned. "Your words are beautiful, but the people are bound to the cycles of the flood and the harvest. How can we ask them to look beyond the fields?" Amos lifted his hand, and a faint shimmer seemed to rise from the vial's hollow interior, as if the memory of the liquid still lingered in the air. "We begin with the river," he answered. "Each year, when the inundation returns, we will gather the families on its banks and tell them the story of the golden shore, of Ankara's hand, of the vortex that binds us to the heavens. We will teach them to read the water's currents as verses of a living poem." Nebet nodded, her smile widening. "And we shall inscribe these verses on new stele, alongside the records of the pharaohs, so that future generations may see that the divine is not a distant myth but a living presence." The council agreed, and a plan was set in motion. Over the following weeks, Amos traveled the length of the Nile, from the fertile delta to the arid reaches of Upper Egypt. He stood on riverbanks where reeds whispered, and he spoke to farmers, merchants, and children, his voice carrying the cadence of the night's vision. He taught them to watch the water's surface for the subtle spirals that foretold the coming flood, to listen for the faint hum that rose when the moon touched the river's crest. In the desert oasis of Siwa, Amos met a wandering mystic named Kepri, who claimed to have once walked the same luminous shore in his dreams. Together, they performed a rite at the oasis's central pool, pouring a handful of desert sand into the water and reciting the ancient hymn of the sun god. As the sand settled, the water glowed faintly, and a chorus of unseen voices rose, echoing the chord Amos had felt on the golden shore. The moment sealed a bond between the desert and the river, a reminder that the divine currents ran through all of Kemet's lands. Back in Thebes, the new stelae rose from the quarry, their carvings depicting Amos's journey, the vortex of water, and the outstretched hand of Ankara. Pilgrims came from distant villages to touch the cool stone, to feel the pulse of the divine beneath their fingertips. The people began to speak of the breath of Kemet in their daily prayers, offering libations not only to the gods of the pantheon, but also to the river itself, acknowledging its role as a conduit of celestial wisdom. Months turned to seasons, and the kingdom's heart beat in a new rhythm. The floodwaters arrived as always, but this time the fields seemed to respond with a richer bounty, as if the land itself recognized the reverence bestowed upon it. Amos, now older and marked by the lines of countless journeys, stood once more before the altar where his rite had begun. He placed a fresh vial, filled this time with water drawn from the Nile's deepest channel, on the stone, and whispered a prayer of gratitude. The candle flame flickered, casting shadows that danced like the ancient vortex. In that quiet moment, Amos sensed the presence of Ankara, her eyes still reflecting the stars, and felt the currents of the divine flow through him, steady and unending. He understood that his role was not a single act of revelation, but a continual weaving of the sacred into the everyday, a bridge that would endure long after his own breath faded into the sands. The following dawn, the river's surface shimmered with a faint afterglow, as if the night's communion had left a lingering filament of starlight woven into the water. Farmers who had tended their fields the night before reported that the seedlings sprouted with a vigor unseen in any season, their leaves unfurling like tiny sails catching an invisible wind. Children gathered at the banks, dipping their fingers into the luminous flow, laughing as the water sang a soft, humming lullaby that seemed to echo the ancient chord Amos had first heard on the golden shore. Word of the miracle spread beyond the borders of Kemet, reaching the ears of distant kingdoms that coveted the secret of the river's blessing. Envoys arrived bearing gifts of lapis, incense, and exotic spices, each seeking an audience with Amos and Azara. The council, now seasoned by years of balancing reverence and governance, convened beneath the towering stele that chronicled the first rite. Nebet, her hair now silvered by time, rose to speak. "The river has given us a gift, but gifts demand stewardship," she intoned, her voice resonant against the stone. "We must guard the balance we have forged, lest curiosity turn to greed and the currents become turbulent." Azura stepped forward, her eyes reflecting the same star-lit water that had guided her mentor. We will teach those who come with open hearts, but we will also test their intentions. The river will reveal truth to those who listen, and conceal it from those who seek only power. In the weeks that followed, a series of trials unfolded along the Nile's length. A caravan of merchants from the distant lands of Punt arrived, their caravans laden with ivory and gold. When they attempted to extract water from the sacred pool without the accompanying chant, the water turned to thick, black mud, swallowing their jars and leaving their men humbled. A group of scholars from the city of Memphis, eager to record the celestial harmonies, were granted a night beside the river. As they recited the verses of the vortex, the water rose in a gentle spiral, forming a luminous column that rose above the reeds. Within that column, the scholars glimpsed fleeting images of the cosmos, nebulae, constellations, and the faint outline of a great wheel turning in the heavens. Their scribes hurried to copy the visions, knowing that such knowledge could reshape the understanding of the world. Yet not all trials were gentle. A drought, sudden and fierce, struck the southern reaches of the kingdom. The Nile's waters receded, exposing cracked riverbeds and withering crops. Whispers rose among the people. Had the divine currents withdrawn their favor? Amos, now frail but still bearing the weight of countless journeys, walked to the edge of the dwindling river. He knelt, placing his palm upon the dry mud, and whispered a prayer not for abundance, but for patience. In that moment, the wind shifted, carrying with it a faint scent of lotus and distant rain. The sky darkened, and a single, brilliant comet arced across the horizon, its tail a ribbon of silver fire. The comet's passage was accompanied by a low, resonant hum that seemed to rise from the very earth. The river's surface trembled, and a narrow stream of water burst forth from a fissure in the riverbed, carving a new channel that quickly swelled into a flowing current. The people gathered, eyes wide with awe, as the water surged forward, filling the parched banks and restoring life to the fields. Azura raised her arms, chanting the ancient hymn of the sun god, her voice weaving with the hum of the comet. The water responded, shimmering with specks of starlight that fell like rain upon the land. The drought was broken not by the rain of the heavens, but by the river's own rebirth, guided by the celestial omen. In the aftermath, the council inscribed a new stela, its surface etched with the image of the comet and the renewed river, alongside the hand of Ankara and the vortex of water. Beneath the carving, a simple line was added: "When the sky sings, the earth listens." The people of Kemet took this as a reminder that the divine was not a distant force, but a living dialogue between the heavens, the river, and every heart willing to hear. Amos, feeling the tide of his own life ebbing, entrusted Azura with the mantle of the bridge. He placed his weathered staff, a reed once used to stir the waters of the original rite, into her hands, the wood still humming with the faint echo of the vortex. "You are the next keeper of the currents," he said, his voice a soft ripple. "Guide the people as the river guides the land, and let the stars be your compass." Azura bowed, feeling the weight of centuries settle upon her shoulders, yet also the lightness of purpose that had always driven her. As the sun set behind the western hills, casting a golden veil over the Nile, she looked out over the water, now alive with the reflected glow of countless stars. The river sang, the heavens whispered, and the people of Kemet stood ready to listen, their lives forever intertwined with the breath of the divine that flowed through every ripple. She felt the weight of the moment settle like a stone in her chest, yet the hum of the staff vibrated against her palm, urging her forward. With a steady breath, Azura lifted the reed and pointed it toward the luminous figure. If the currents of the heavens demand a choice, I will walk the path they lay before us, she said, her voice steady as the river's flow. The being inclined its head, and the shimmering pathway on the water's surface widened, becoming a bridge of liquid light that stretched beyond the riverbank, disappearing into the night sky. Azura stepped onto the bridge, each footfall sending ripples of starlight across the water. The people of Kemet watched in hushed awe, their eyes reflecting the celestial bridge as if it were a mirror of their own hopes. As she advanced, the air grew cooler, and the scent of lotus deepened, mingling with the faint perfume of distant thunder. The bridge pulsed in rhythm with her heartbeat, and the staff in her hand thrummed louder, resonating with the hum that had first accompanied the comet. At the far end of the bridge, the obsidian figure stood beside a vast, rotating sphere of crystal, its surface swirling with constellations that shifted like living maps. This is the loom of Amen, the being intoned, where the threads of destiny are woven. Within it lie the knowledge of the river's true source, the origin of the comet's fire, and the secret that binds sky and earth. To draw a thread is to claim its power, but also to bear its burden. Azura placed her staff against the crystal, and a filament of light emerged, wrapping around the reed and spiraling into the sphere. Visions flooded her mind. The first flood that carved the Nile, the ancient pact between the sun god Ra and the river's spirit, the hidden chambers beneath the riverbed where water gathered before its journey to the sea, and a prophecy of a future where the river would once again run dry, unless the balance was restored through a sacrifice of memory. She saw herself, older and wiser, standing at the river's edge, whispering the ancient hymn not just for rain but for remembrance. The people would forget the old songs, and with that forgetting the river would lose its voice. To keep the currents alive, a story must be kept alive, a story that must be told anew each generation. When the vision faded, the obsidian figure spoke again, softer now. You have seen what is hidden. The choice remains. You may take the knowledge and bind it to your people, ensuring prosperity for 100 years, but the memory of the old ways will fade. Or you may return with only the promise of the river's rebirth, trusting that the people will keep the song alive, even if the river's power wanes. Azura lowered her staff, feeling the weight of centuries of prayer and song settle upon her shoulders. She thought of Amos, of the comet's silver fire, of the children who chased the river's reflections. The river had always been a dialogue, not a command. She understood that true power lay not in hoarding knowledge, but in nurturing the bond between heart and water. "Let the river speak," she answered, her voice carrying across the bridge. "Let the people remember the song, and let the currents guide us as they have always done. I will not bind the knowledge to stone, but to memory, to story, to the rhythm of our lives." The obsidian figure smiled, and the crystal sphere brightened, sending a cascade of starlight down the bridge. The light settled upon the river, turning its surface into a tapestry of constellations that danced with each ripple. The people below felt a gentle tug in their chests, as if an ancient chord had been struck anew. When Azura stepped back onto the riverbank, the bridge of light dissolved into mist, leaving only the faint scent of lotus and the echo of the comet's hum. The staff in her hand glowed with a soft, steady pulse, a reminder that the covenant was renewed not through secret knowledge, but through shared remembrance. She turned to the gathered crowd, her eyes reflecting the newly constellated river. "Tonight we have been shown the path," she said, "but the journey continues with each of us. Let us teach our children the hymn. Let us carve the story upon every wall, and let the river's song be the heartbeat of Kemet for all time." The people lifted their voices in unison, their chant rising like the river itself, weaving through the night and carrying the promise of a future where sky and earth, water and star, would forever listen and speak to one another. The reverberations of the chant lingered in the night air, each note a thread weaving the community tighter to the river's pulse. As the last syllable faded, a hush settled over the banks, broken only by the soft lapping of water against the stone steps. Azura lifted her staff, its glow now a steady ember, and stepped forward, her sandals leaving faint imprints that seemed to merge with the river's own markings. "From this night onward," she called, her voice carrying the weight of the ancient hymn, "the story will be lived, not merely spoken. We will carve the verses upon the walls of our homes, paint them on the pottery of our markets, and teach them as lullabies to our children." She turned to Amos, whose eyes reflected the constellations now shimmering on the water's surface. "You will be the keeper of the first school, the place where the river's memory is taught. Let the children learn the rhythm of the current as they learn to read the stars." Amos bowed his head, feeling the responsibility settle like a warm stone in his palm. He raised his own staff, a slender rod of polished ebony etched with the sigil of the comet, and whispered a promise that rose with the wind. "I will gather the elders, the scribes, the weavers, and we will bind the hymn to every craft. The river will be spoken in the rhythm of the loom, in the cadence of the market's barter, in the breath of the night watch." The crowd, moved by the clarity of purpose, began to disperse in small groups, each carrying a piece of the night's revelation. Some headed toward the temple of Ra, where priests would inscribe the verses upon the altar's stone slabs. Others moved toward the workshops along the river, ready to etch the words onto the sides of jars that would travel far beyond Kemet's borders. Children, eyes wide with wonder, clutched the hands of their mothers and ran toward the reeds, eager to hear the river's song echo in their own laughter. Under the glow of the constellations, Azura walked to the hidden chambers beneath the riverbed that she had glimpsed in her vision. The entrance, concealed by a veil of water lilies, opened with a soft sigh as she placed the staff against the ancient stone. The water receded, revealing a staircase of smooth basalt leading down into the cool, echoing depths. Torches flickered to life as she descended, the light dancing on walls covered in faded hieroglyphs that told of past pacts and forgotten prayers. At the heart of the chambers lay a crystal basin, its surface still and mirror-like. Azura knelt and placed the staff beside it, allowing the pulse of the staff to merge with the basin's quiet resonance. A ripple spread outward, and the walls began to glow with a faint blue luminescence, revealing a new layer of inscription, one that had been waiting for a voice to awaken it. The words formed a simple refrain. Remember the water, remember the sky. Let the song flow where hearts comply. In memory kept, the river lives. In every breath its spirit gives. She whispered the refrain, and the basin sang back, the sound weaving through the stone and rising like a breath of wind. The echo traveled up the staircase, out into the night, and settled upon the gathered people, who felt the refrain settle in their chests as a gentle, familiar tug. In the days that followed, the hymn became the rhythm of daily life. Children sang it as they fetched water, mothers hummed it while grinding grain, and the priests recited it before each offering to Ra. The walls of homes filled with painted scenes of the river's journey, its birth in the highlands, its descent through desert valleys, its meeting with the sea, each image accompanied by the refrain etched in gold leaf. Months turned into seasons, and the river's flow grew steadier, its waters clearer. The crops along its banks flourished, and the markets thrummed with the exchange of goods and stories alike. Yet, as the memory of the old ways deepened, a subtle unease began to stir in the shadows beyond the city's walls. Travelers from distant lands arrived, bearing gifts of exotic spices and silks, but also whispers of a new power that coveted the river's secret, an emissary of the desert king who sought to harness the river's magic for his own armies. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the dunes and the constellations re-emerged, Amos stood on the riverbank with a group of elders. The emissary, cloaked in sable and bearing a staff of obsidian, approached with measured steps. "Your river sings a beautiful song," he said, his voice smooth as polished basalt. "But songs can be captured, recorded, and used. I propose a pact. Share the knowledge of the river's currents, and in return I will grant you protection from the sandstorms that threaten your fields." Azura appeared from the mist, her staff's pulse now a steady rhythm that matched the river's own heartbeat. She regarded the emissary with eyes that held the depth of the Nile itself. "The river's song is not a commodity," she replied. "It is a living memory. To bind it to stone or to weapon would break the covenant we have renewed. We will protect our people, but we will not surrender the river's soul." The emissary's smile faded, and a tension rippled across the water. In that moment, the river seemed to hold its breath, the constellations above flickering as if awaiting a decision. Amos stepped forward, his staff raised, and spoke the refrain that had become the lifeblood of Kemet. The words rose on the wind, reaching the emissary's ears and stirring something deep within him, a memory of his own ancestors' rivers, long forgotten. For a heartbeat, the Desert King's envoy lowered his staff, the hardness in his gaze softening. "Perhaps," he whispered, "the true strength lies not in domination but in remembrance." He turned and vanished into the night, leaving behind a single obsidian shard that glimmered with the faint imprint of the river's flow. The people watched the shard fall into the water, where it sank and dissolved into a spray of silver light. The river sang louder than ever, its currents carrying the refrain downstream, through villages and far-flung oases, reminding all who heard that memory, when honored, could turn even the harshest desert into a conduit of life. Azura lowered her staff, feeling the river's gratitude pulse through her veins. She looked to Amos, whose smile was both weary and hopeful. "The covenant is alive," she said, "not because we bound knowledge to stone, but because we have woven the song into the fabric of every heart." Together they turned back toward the city, where the night was alive with music, laughter, and the ever-present hum of the river's endless hymn. The massive doors of the submerged sanctuary groaned open, spilling a cool, luminous mist into the dim corridor beyond. Inside, columns of polished basalt rose like ancient sentinels, each etched with flowing hieroglyphs that pulsed faintly in rhythm with the river's song. Water lapped at their ankles, rising and falling in perfect cadence, as if the very architecture breathed with the current. At the heart of the chamber stood a basin of liquid crystal, its surface a mirror to the sky above and the depths below. Within its depths swirled images of the river's birth, shimmering threads of water drawn from the first rain, guided by the hands of forgotten deities, and woven into the tapestry of the land. Azura stepped forward, her staff humming in resonance, and placed her palm upon the crystal's edge. Instantly, the water surged, pulling her vision into a cascade of memories. She saw the river's first guardians, tall figures of reed and stone, chanting the original refrain that bound the water to the people. Their voices rose in a chorus that stitched together the lives of farmers, traders, and nomads, each note a promise of sustenance and protection. As the vision deepened, a darker current emerged, a shadow of the Desert King's ancestors, once masters of sand and storm, who had tried centuries ago to dam the river for their own armies. Their attempts had fractured, leaving behind a lingering scar that pulsed faintly beneath the surface. Amuse felt the pull of the same tide and joined her, his own staff glowing with a soft amber light. Together they traced the scar with their combined energies, and the crystal responded, revealing a hidden passage that spiraled downward, its walls lined with phosphorescent algae that illuminated a stairway of living stone. The air grew cooler, and the sound of distant drums echoed, as if the river itself were beating a warning. At the bottom of the stair, they entered a vaulted hall where a council of river spirits awaited. Their forms shifted between water, mist, and the silhouettes of ancient Chemetian ancestors. The eldest spirit, a figure cloaked in flowing sapphire, spoke without words, its thoughts rippling directly into their minds. Your covenant has been tested, the spirit conveyed. The shard you reclaimed bears a fragment of the Desert King's intent. It is a seed of discord that can sprout into a flood of domination if left unchecked. Yet within its darkness lies a conduit, a way to bind the river's memory to those who honor it, not to those who would imprison it. Azura's eyes widened. Can we turn that seed into a shield? The spirit nodded, and the water in the basin rose, forming a translucent lattice that hovered above the council. Threads of silver light intertwined with the obsidian shard, creating a latticework of memory and protection. The spirits explained that by embedding the shard within the river's song, through a ritual of remembrance performed by the people, its power could be redirected to safeguard the lands from any external force. Amuse felt the weight of responsibility settle upon him. He turned to Azura, seeing in her the same resolve that had guided their ancestors. We must bring this knowledge back to the city, he said. The people must hear the true story of the river, not just the melody they sing. The spirits granted them a vial of the living water, its surface swirling with the newly forged lattice. Carry this to the source, they intoned. When the river reaches its mouth, pour it into the great confluence. The river will carry the shield downstream, binding the shard's darkness to the memory of all who cherish the flow. With reverence, Amos and Azura descended the stone stair, the vial cradled between them. As they emerged from the temple, the night sky had deepened, stars glittering like scattered diamonds over the dunes. The city's lanterns flickered in the distance, and the river sang louder than ever, as if sensing the impending rite. They hurried to the river's source, a spring hidden among limestone cliffs, where the water gathered before spilling into the main channel. The air was cool, scented with mineral and night-blooming jasmine. Azura raised the vial, and as she tipped it, the liquid cascaded into the spring, merging instantly with the river's flow. A luminous ripple spread outward, a wave of silver light that traced the river's path, touching every village, oasis, and field along its banks. In the city, people paused in their celebrations, feeling a subtle shift in the music that rose from the river banks. The familiar refrain deepened, now carrying an undercurrent of resolve. Children laughed, elders smiled, and even the desert wind seemed to soften, as if acknowledging the renewed covenant. From the dunes beyond, a lone figure watched the river's glow from a ridge. The emissary of the Desert King, his sable cloak now tattered, stood silent. The obsidian shard in his hand had dissolved into dust, carried away by the river's song. He lowered his gaze, the hardness in his eyes replaced by a quiet respect. The Desert King's armies, hearing the river's amplified hymn, halted their march, their banners snapping in a wind that no longer whispered of conquest but of reverence. Azura and Amos returned to the city, their steps light but purposeful. The river's endless hymn now bore within it the memory of both triumph and warning, a living testament that the true strength of a people lay not in domination, but in the shared remembrance of the waters that sustained them. The night continued to pulse with music, laughter, and the ever-present hum of a river that had become both shield and song for all who called its banks home. Amos stepped forward, his hand hovering over the water as if he could feel the tremor beneath its surface. Azura placed a palm on his shoulder, her eyes narrowing as she listened to the faint discord that rippled through the melody. The crowd, gathered in a semicircle of lantern light, sensed the shift. Their songs faltered, and a hush fell over the river bank. From the shadows beyond the torches, Lyra slipped a small, obsidian talisman into the current. The stone, dark as night and pulsing with a faint, malevolent glow, sank silently, its edges humming with a counter-frequency that gnawed at the silver lattice woven into the water. As the talisman settled, the river's light dimmed, and the protective shimmer that had stretched across the valleys began to fray. A sudden gasp rose from the assembled villagers when a ripple of blackened water surged forward, swallowing a section of the luminous path. The river's song, once steady and bright, now cracked like a broken string. Amos felt the weight of the ancient covenant strain against the new threat, and a cold resolve settled in his chest. "Azura," he whispered, "the shard's darkness is trying to reassert itself. We must counter it before the river loses its memory entirely." She nodded, her fingers already tracing the sigils of remembrance etched into the stone altar they had carried from the temple. The symbols glowed faintly, fed by the collective belief of the people who stood nearby. Drawing upon the memory of the ritual, Amos lifted his voice, chanting the verses his ancestors had sung when the river was first tamed. Azura joined, their harmonies intertwining with the lingering melody of the water. The crowd, sensing the urgency, began to chant in unison, their voices rising like a tide of hope. The combined resonance formed a new lattice, brighter than before, seeking the source of the disturbance. The obsidian talisman quivered under the onslaught of sound, its dark aura flickering. Lyra, hidden behind a column, clenched her jaw as the power she had unleashed began to unravel. She lunged forward, attempting to seize the talisman and throw it back into the depths, but a sudden surge of water, guided by Amos's outstretched hand, swept her feet from the ground. She stumbled, the talisman slipping from her grasp and spiraling downstream. As the talisman fell, the river's current caught it and hurled it toward the confluence where the living water had first been poured. The silver lattice, now reinforced by the collective chant, wrapped around the obsidian fragment, drawing it into a vortex of light. The darkness within the stone writhed, then dissolved into a cascade of sparkling droplets that merged with the river's flow, their essence transformed into memory rather than menace. The river's hymn swelled once more, louder and purer than ever, its silver threads knitting the broken sections back together. The villagers erupted in cheers, their songs now layered with a deeper, resonant chord that spoke of vigilance and unity. Amos lowered his head, feeling the river's gratitude pulse through his veins, while Azura placed a gentle hand on his arm, her smile reflecting the reflected starlight on the water. Lyra, drenched and humbled, was led away by the city guards. Her eyes, once cold, now held a flicker of remorse as she watched the river's renewed glow. In the days that followed, she was offered a place among the keepers of the river, a chance to atone by learning the true song of remembrance. Whether she would accept remained uncertain, but the possibility of redemption whispered through the dunes. The summer solstice night concluded with a celebration unlike any before. Torches burned brighter, drums beat in rhythm with the river's pulse, and dancers traced patterns that mirrored the silver lattice now etched across the water's surface. Amos and Azura stood at the river's edge, their silhouettes framed by the moonlit flow, knowing that the covenant was not a static shield but a living promise that required constant guardianship. As the first light of dawn brushed the horizon, the river sang a new verse, one that spoke of trials faced, darkness repelled, and the unbreakable bond between a people and the waters that sustained them. The melody drifted across the dunes, reaching even the farthest oasis, a reminder that as long as the song was remembered, the river would forever be both shield and song for all who called its banks home. The night air grew thick with incense and the soft murmur of anticipation. As Amos raised his hands, the river's current seemed to pulse beneath the moonlit stones, sending ripples of silver across the gathering. Azura's voice, clear and resonant, began to weave the ancient melody, each note a thread that bound the listeners together. The keepers, their faces lined with centuries of memory, answered in low harmonies, their chants echoing the cadence of the water's own heartbeat. Lyra stepped forward from the circle of guards, her eyes now bright with purpose. She placed the small, polished stone she had crafted during her apprenticeship, a token of the river's memory, on the stone altar at the river's edge. The token glowed faintly, a reminder that even those who once strayed could become conduits of the song. The river teaches us that every current, no matter how turbulent, can find its way back to the source, she said, her voice steadier than it had ever been. If we are to help another river, we must first understand the rhythm that sustains it. The traveling musicians unfurled a weather-worn map, its edges frayed by countless journeys. The inked lines traced a route across scorching deserts, over jagged cliffs, and finally to a valley where the distant river, known among their people as the Veiled Stream, had begun to run thin and silent. Their leader, a lanky man named Sarin, lifted a reed flute to his lips and played a mournful phrase that seemed to carry the weight of his homeland's sorrow. The note hung in the air, and the water responded, rising in a gentle swell as if acknowledging the plea. Amos listened, feeling the river's ancient wisdom settle within him. The Veiled Stream once sang in harmony with the moon, he explained, but its banks have been scarred by greed and neglect. To restore it, we must first mend the broken covenant that once bound its people to the water. He turned to Azura, whose eyes reflected the starlight. "Will you walk with me to the valley?" Together we can teach them the true song, and perhaps the river will remember its own voice. Azra nodded, her hand finding his. The river's song is not a single verse, but a chorus of many hearts. If we bring the chorus of our people, the veiled stream may find its melody again. The council murmured approval, and the keepers began to prepare a caravan of supplies. Woven baskets of river reeds, crystal vials filled with the river's purified water, and scrolls inscribed with the verses of remembrance. Before dawn broke, the caravan set out, the river's silver lattice shimmering on the water's surface as a beacon for those who would follow. Lyra rode beside Amos, her newfound confidence evident in the steady rhythm of her horse's hooves. The musicians walked ahead, their instruments slung across their backs, ready to share their own songs once they reached the valley. Days turned into weeks as the caravan crossed dunes that sang with the wind and oases that whispered of forgotten springs. At night, they gathered around campfires, each member contributing a fragment of the river's hymn. The combined chorus rose, weaving a tapestry of sound that seemed to lift the very stars. Even the desert sands shifted ever so slightly, as if the earth itself leaned in to listen. When the caravan finally arrived at the veiled stream, they found a riverbed cracked and dry, its banks choked with debris and the remnants of abandoned irrigation channels. The villagers there, gaunt and wary, gathered around the strangers, their eyes reflecting both hope and suspicion. Saren stepped forward, lowering his flute. "We have come bearing the song of another river," he announced, "and we ask for your trust to share it." Amos stepped into the shallow pool that remained, cupping the river's thin water in his hands. He whispered the verses his ancestors had sung, letting the words flow into the liquid like droplets of light. Azara raised her arms, and the silver lattice that had once bound their own river flickered into existence, hovering above the veiled stream like a translucent bridge. The lattice extended tendrils toward the cracked banks, each filament humming with the resonance of the shared chant. Lyra, remembering the darkness she had once wielded, pressed the polished stone she had offered at the altar into the river's remaining water. The stone absorbed the faint glow, then released a cascade of tiny, luminescent droplets that fell like rain upon the parched earth. As the droplets touched the soil, the ground seemed to sigh, and a faint green sprout pushed through the cracked mud. The villagers gasped as the water began to stir, a thin ribbon of silver threading itself through the debris, guided by the lattice's unseen hand. The musicians lifted their instruments, and together with Amos and Azara, they sang a unified hymn that rose above the valley. The river responded, widening its course, filling the old channels and reclaiming the life that had been lost. When the final note faded, the veiled stream flowed strong and clear, its surface catching the moon's reflection in a dance of light. The people of the valley fell to their knees, tears mixing with the water, grateful for the gift of renewal. Saren placed his flute on the river bank, a silent promise that the song would be kept alive in his homeland as well. The caravan turned back toward their own dunes, hearts lighter and spirits buoyed by the success of their mission. Along the way, Lyra whispered to Amos, "I once thought redemption was a distant shore, but now I see it is a river we must keep swimming in." He smiled, feeling the river's gratitude flow through his veins once more. Back at their home, the river sang a fresh verse, one that spoke of bridges built across distant lands, of songs shared and healed, and of the unending cycle of giving and receiving. The silver lattice glimmered brighter than ever, a living testament to the truth that a river's strength lies not only in its waters, but in the chorus of every soul that chooses to listen and to sing. The silver lattice thrummed with a low, steady pulse, as if the river itself were breathing through its filaments. That night, as the moon rose high over the dunes, a soft vibration traveled along the shimmering threads, reaching the farthest reaches of the caravan's camp. Saren awoke to the faint hum resonating in his chest, a reminder that the song was not yet finished. He rose quietly, his flute cradled against his side, and followed the lattice's glow to the edge of the oasis, where the water still whispered its fresh verse. There Azura stood with her arms outstretched, eyes closed, her palms hovering above the surface. The lattice's tendrils curled around her, pulling the water into a delicate spiral that rose like a silver vortex. From its center emerged a faint, luminous shape, a figure composed of water and light, its form shifting between a child's silhouette and a river's curve. "The River Keeper," Amos whispered, his voice trembling with reverence. "It has come to ask for our aid once more." The keeper's voice was a cascade of droplets, each syllable echoing the rhythm of the river's flow. Beyond the dunes, where the sands meet the stone cliffs, a river once sang with the wind but now lies silent. Its waters have been stolen by a darkness that feeds on sound. Without its voice, the valley will wither and the lattice will fray. Lyra stepped forward, the polished stone still warm against her palm. She felt the familiar pull of the darkness she had once wielded, now tempered by the humility of redemption. "We will go," she said, her tone steady. "The song that saved the veiled stream must travel again." The keeper's form shimmered, and a single droplet fell from its center, landing in Lyra's hand. It pulsed with a faint blue light, a seed of the river's essence. "Carry this," it instructed. "Let its rhythm guide you through the silence." The next dawn, the caravan gathered their belongings, the lattice stretching ahead like a silver road that seemed to stretch beyond the horizon. Saren lifted his flute, and a soft melody rose, weaving through the lattice and binding the group together. As they moved, the desert sands shifted beneath their feet, forming a smooth path that glimmered with the river's reflected light. Days turned into nights, and the caravan trekked across dunes that sang with the wind, across cliffs where the air was thin, and the stars seemed close enough to touch. At the foot of the stone cliffs, they found a canyon choked with ash and echoing with a hollow, mournful silence. The river that once ran through it was reduced to a cracked bed, its banks lined with blackened stones that absorbed any sound that dared approach. Azura raised her arms, and the lattice unfurled, its filaments seeking the fissures in the canyon walls. With each touch, The silver thread sang a low, resonant chord that vibrated through the stone, coaxing hidden pools of water to rise. The keeper's droplet in Lyra's hand glowed brighter, and she pressed it to the canyon floor. A surge of liquid erupted, carving a new channel through the ash, and the lattice followed, binding the fresh flow to the old river's memory. But the darkness that had stolen the water was not idle. From the shadows emerged a shape of shifting ink, its presence sucking the very vibrations from the air. It coiled around the canyon, a living void that threatened to swallow the newly formed stream. Amos stepped forward, his voice steady as he began the ancient chant of his ancestors, a rhythm that resonated with the heartbeat of the earth. The chant rose, intertwining with Saren's flute and Lyra's stone, each note a thread of light against the encroaching gloom. The lattice vibrated in response, its silver strands forming a protective dome around the water. As the music swelled, the darkness recoiled, its edges trembling. Azura summoned the wind, sending gusts that carried the melody deeper into the canyon, scattering the ink like void like mist before the sunrise. With a final, resonant chord, the river burst forth in a roar, cascading over the cliffs and spilling into the valley below. The canyon filled with rushing water, the sound of its flow echoing like a chorus of countless voices. The darkness dissolved into the spray, its essence carried away by the river's song. Exhausted but exhilarated, the caravan stood on the newly revived banks, watching the water carve its path through stone and sand. The silver lattice glimmered brighter than ever, its threads now linking two rivers, one that had been healed, the other that had been reborn. The keeper's form reappeared, hovering above the water, its eyes reflecting the endless flow. "You have restored the balance," it said, its voice a gentle current. "Remember, every river is a thread in the tapestry of life. As long as you keep singing, the tapestry will never fray." Saren lowered his flute, feeling the weight of the promise settle within him. Lyra placed the stone back into the river, watching as it sank and dissolved, its light merging with the water's own glow. Amos smiled, his heart full of the ancient verses that now rang louder than ever. Azura lifted her arms once more, and the lattice sang a quiet hymn, binding the two rivers together in a perpetual duet. The caravan turned back toward their homeland, the desert now echoing with the sound of flowing water and the distant, hopeful chorus of countless souls. Each step they took left a faint ripple in the sand, a reminder that the river's strength lived not only in its waters, but in the song that traveled with every traveler who chose to listen, to sing, and to carry its melody onward. Night settled over the dunes, and the caravan's lanterns flickered like fireflies caught in a gentle breeze. The silver lattice, now a faint aurora above the water's edge, pulsed in rhythm with the traveler's heartbeats, each beat a promise that the song would not be forgotten. Amos felt the ancient verses humming beneath his ribs, a low tide of memory that urged him forward. He glanced at Saren, whose flute rested against his shoulder, its wood still warm from the last chord, and saw in the young musician's eyes the spark of a new melody waiting to be born. Ahead, the silhouette of their homeland rose from the sand, a city of stone arches and wind-carved towers, its walls once dry and mute, now humming with the distant echo of water. As they approached the outer gate, a figure stepped forward from the shadows, a woman draped in flowing indigo, her hair threaded with tiny shells that glimmered like dew. The keeper's voice resonated in the air, though its form was hidden, and the woman spoke with a tone that seemed to carry the river's current. "Welcome home, keepers of the song," she said, extending a hand that held a crystal vial filled with the river's glowing essence. "The water you have freed has traveled farther than you can see. It seeps into the roots of the ancient oases, awakens the sleeping springs, and calls to those who have forgotten the language of flow. This vial contains a fragment of that renewal. Take it to the heart well, the source that lies beneath the city's oldest well. There, the lattice will find its final thread, and the tapestry will be woven anew." Lyra stepped forward, her palms still tinged with the faint luminescence of the stone that had dissolved. She placed the vial upon a stone altar that rose from the sand, and as the crystal cracked open, a cascade of liquid light spilled into the ground, sinking into the earth with a soft sigh. The sand around the altar shimmered, revealing a network of veins, glimmering pathways that pulsed like a living map. Azura lifted her arms, and the wind answered, swirling the light into spirals that rose toward the night sky, forming constellations that mirrored the river's course. The caravan moved as one, following the newly illuminated veins toward the city's center. Beneath the bustling market squares, where merchants once shouted over the clamor of trade, a low hum now resonated, felt more than heard. Children paused their games, eyes widening as the ground beneath their feet seemed to breathe. The keeper's presence grew stronger, its form coalescing into a translucent figure that drifted above the central well, its eyes reflecting the countless stars above and the river's endless flow below. "Listen," the keeper whispered, and the water within the well rose in a single, luminous column, spiraling upward until it broke the surface of the night. From its crest fell droplets that turned to silver threads, weaving themselves into the air, connecting the lanterns, the market stalls, the rooftops, and the hearts of every soul present. The lattice, now complete, sang a hymn that was both ancient and new, a chorus of every voice that had ever sung to the river, every footstep that had ever left a ripple in the sand. Saren lifted his flute once more, but this time the music did not come from his breath alone. The wind carried his notes, the stone's memory lent its resonance, and the river's pulse gave them depth. Together they created a symphony that rose above the city, spilling into the desert beyond, reaching the farthest dunes where the night was still and the stars hung like lanterns. In that moment, the desert itself seemed to sigh, its endless expanse softened by the promise of water, of song, of connection. The caravan, now bound not only by purpose, but by the very fabric of the world they had helped mend, turned toward the horizon. Ahead lay new valleys, hidden springs, and perhaps other shadows that waited for a melody to dissolve them. Yet they walked with confidence, each step leaving a ripple that would echo long after their footprints faded, a reminder that as long as the song endured, the tapestry would never fray. Nakla raised her hand, and the dunes behind her seemed to inhale, pulling the night air into a soft, humming vortex. From the shifting sands rose a column of water, clear as polished glass, spiraling upward until it brushed the stars themselves. The liquid formed a bridge of liquid light that arced toward the caravan, inviting them to step onto its surface. Lyra felt the familiar pulse of the river within the bridge and, without hesitation, placed her foot upon it. The water welcomed her weight, solid as stone yet warm as a summer rain. One by one, Azura and Saren followed, their instruments humming in resonance with the bridge's song. Even the keeper, a translucent wisp of ancient memory, drifted down and settled beside them, its eyes reflecting the luminous current. As they crossed, the bridge carried them not across sand but into a hidden valley that had been folded into the desert's folds for centuries. Lush reeds swayed in a gentle breeze, and a river, broader and deeper than any they had known, wound through emerald meadows dotted with blossoms that glowed faintly in the moonlight. The air was thick with the scent of jasmine and wet stone, a perfume that spoke of life renewed. Nakla stood at the valley's edge, her robe shimmering with the colors of sunrise and sunset. "This is the Vale of Asha," she said, her voice echoing like distant water. "It is the heart of the river's memory, a place where every song ever sung to the water is kept. Here the tapestry can be woven not just for this city, but for all the lands that thirst for its thread." Lyra knelt beside the river's edge, cupping the luminous water that still clung to her fingertips. She could feel the river's memory swirling within, echoes of ancient caravans, forgotten prayers, the laughter of children who had once played on its banks. She turned to Azura, whose lyre now glowed with a soft amber hue. "Let us add our own verse," Azura whispered, and began to pluck a chord that resonated with the rustling reeds. The note rose, mingling with the river's own song, and the water responded, rippling outward in concentric circles that carried the melody deeper into the valley. Saren lifted his flute, and the wind that had once carried his solitary tune now swelled into a choir of breezes. Each breath he took added a layer of harmony, and the keeper's translucent form shimmered brighter with each passing phrase, as if the ancient spirit were being re-inked with fresh ink. The river itself seemed to awaken. From its depth rose a procession of luminous fish, their scales reflecting constellations that had never been seen in the desert sky. They swam in synchronized patterns, forming symbols that glowed briefly before dissolving into droplets that fell like rain upon the meadow. Each droplet landed on a leaf, a stone, a blade of grass, and where they touched, tiny veins of light spread, stitching the ground into a living lattice. Nakla stepped forward, her hands outstretched. "Now the final thread," she intoned. From the ground beneath the altar where Lyra had broken the vial, a slender filament of pure light rose, twisting around the river's current. It rose higher, joining the silver threads that had once connected the lanterns of the city, and then surged upward, threading itself through the night sky, stitching the constellations into a new pattern, a river of stars that would guide travelers for generations. The tapestry was no longer a static weave. It became a living conduit, pulsing with every heartbeat of the world. Those who walked the dunes would feel the river's song beneath their soles, and those who listened to the wind would hear the faint echo of Lyra's flute, Azura's lyre, and Saren's melody intertwined with the ancient hum of the keeper. A sudden rustle rose from the edge of the meadow. From behind a curtain of flowering vines emerged a figure cloaked in sand-colored fabric, eyes glittering with curiosity. It was a child, no older than 10, with hair the color of sunrise and a small, intricately carved flute tucked into a satchel. "Will you teach us the song?" the child asked, voice trembling with awe. Lyra smiled, feeling the river's flow steady within her. "We will teach you," she replied, "and you will carry it to places where the desert still thirsts for water and hope." The child's eyes widened, and with a reverent bow, they lifted the tiny flute to their lips. As the first note rose, the valley responded, and the river's surface glittered with 1,000 new stars, each one a promise that the song would never cease, that the tapestry would forever expand, and that the desert, once silent, now sang. The child slipped through the veil of vines, the seed cradled gently in their palm, and the night seemed to part before them, a ribbon of moonlit sand guiding their steps. Each footfall left a faint imprint that glowed for a heartbeat before fading, as if the desert itself remembered the path of the song. In the distance, the silhouettes of ancient caravan routes emerged, their lanterns flickering like fireflies caught in a gentle breeze. As the child approached the first caravan, the travelers paused, their eyes drawn to the soft luminescence that trailed behind the small figure. A weathered merchant, his beard dusted with the gold of countless dunes, raised a hand and asked, "What brings a child of sunrise to the wandering sands?" The child lifted the flute, its carved wood catching the starlight, and played a single, pure note. The melody rose, weaving through the night air, and the caravan's camels lowered their heads, their throats humming in response. The sand beneath the wheels softened, revealing hidden veins of water that glistened like veins of crystal. The merchant's eyes widened. "The river sings," he whispered, "and the desert drinks." He reached into his satchel and produced a small, weather-worn map, its edges frayed by wind. "There is a place beyond the dunes where the sky meets the earth, a well forgotten by time. If the song can reach it, perhaps the water will rise again." He handed the map to the child, who accepted it with reverent hands, feeling the weight of destiny settle upon their shoulders. Night after night the child traveled, the song ever present in their breath. In each oasis they passed, they planted the glowing seed Nakla had given them. Where the seed touched the sand, a tender shoot unfurled, its leaves shimmering with the same amber hue of Azura's lyre. These seedlings grew swiftly, their roots seeking the hidden currents of the river's song, and where they blossomed, the air filled with a faint perfume of jasmine and rain. Travelers who rested beneath the new foliage reported dreams of flowing water and distant constellations, rearranging themselves into familiar patterns. One evening, as the child reached the edge of a vast, wind-scarred plateau, the sky darkened not with night but with a gathering of storm clouds that seemed to pulse in rhythm with the child's flute. Lightning traced the outlines of the ancient constellations, and the wind carried a distant echo, Lyra's flute, Azura's lyre, Saren's breath, blended into a chorus that resonated through the very bones of the earth. The keeper, still translucent and luminous, rose from the river's edge, its form expanding to fill the horizon like a living aurora. "You have carried the song farther than any of us could have imagined," the keeper intoned, its voice a chorus of water, wind, and starlight. "The tapestry you weave now binds the desert to the heavens, and the river's heart beats in every grain of sand." With a graceful gesture, the keeper extended a hand toward the storm, and the clouds opened, releasing a gentle rain that fell in silver threads, each droplet a note of the ancient melody. The rain soaked the plateau, and where it touched the ground, the sand transformed into fertile soil. From this newly birthed earth sprang a grove of crystal-bark trees, their branches humming with the same resonance that had guided the child's journey. Beneath the canopy, a spring emerged, its waters clear as glass and humming with the river's song. The child knelt beside it, cupping the water in their hands, and felt the pulse of the world align with their own heartbeat. Word of the miracle spread like fire across the dunes. Nomads, scholars, and wanderers converged on the oasis, each bringing their own instruments, drums, reeds, strings, and together they formed a grand orchestra that played beneath the canopy of stars. The music rose, a living tapestry that stitched together past and future, sorrow and hope, weaving a new legend into the fabric of the desert. Lyra, Azura, Saren, and Nakla arrived at the gathering, their faces illuminated by the glow of the newly formed river of stars overhead. They joined the chorus, their instruments blending seamlessly with the child's flute, creating a harmony that seemed to echo beyond the confines of the valley, reaching the farthest dunes and the highest peaks. The desert, once a silent expanse, now sang a perpetual lullaby, its verses carried on the wind to every thirsty traveler who dared to listen. The child, now no longer a child but a keeper of the song, placed the final seed into the heart of the spring. As it sank, the water glowed brighter, and a ripple of light traveled outward, touching every corner of the world. The tapestry, ever expanding, pulsed with a rhythm that promised renewal, reminding all who walked the sands that hope, like water, could always find a way to flow. The night deepened, and the music swelled, each note a thread weaving itself into the fabric of the oasis. The newcomer's instrument, a silvered chalumeau that seemed to breathe with the rhythm of the wind, produced tones that rose like dunes catching the first light of dawn. As she played, the crystal bark trees shimmered, their leaves refracting the starlight into a cascade of colors that fell like rain upon the gathered listeners. From the far edge of the grove, a low hum began to emerge, not from any instrument but from the earth itself. The soil, still fresh from the rain, pulsed in time with the melody, sending ripples through the spring that turned the water into a mirror of the heavens. In that reflection, constellations shifted, forming new patterns that told stories of distant lands and forgotten peoples. The keeper, its luminous form now taking on the gentle contours of a desert rose, drifted closer to the circle of musicians. "Listen," the keeper whispered, its voice a blend of sand and starlight. "The song you have birthed is a seed. It will travel on the breath of the world, seeking places where hope has been buried." With a graceful sweep of its hand, a faint breeze rose from the oasis, carrying the melody beyond the plateau. It brushed the dunes to the east, where a caravan of desert traders paused, their camels' bells chiming in unexpected harmony with the distant tune. The traders, eyes widened by the unseen music, felt an ancient longing stir within them. One of them, a weathered man named Rafik, lifted his own reed flute and without thinking, added a plaintive phrase to the chorus. The sound merged, and the sand beneath their feet softened, revealing a hidden vein of sapphire blue water that glimmered like a vein of moonlight. The oasis expanded, its borders stretching outward as if the very ground were breathing. Word of this miracle traveled faster than the wind across the dunes. In the city of Zahara, perched on the edge of the Great Salt Flats, scholars gathered in marble halls to study the phenomenon. They sent emissaries, poets, cartographers, and healers to the oasis, each bearing a unique instrument and a question that had haunted their people for generations. When they arrived, the chorus welcomed them, and together they composed a symphony that resonated with the pulse of the planet itself. As the music grew, so did the challenges. Dark clouds gathered on the horizon, not of storm but of shadow, coalescing into a shape that resembled a broken lyre. From the depths of the dunes rose a figure cloaked in sable, his eyes twin pits of void. He was known among the oldest legends as Karaz, the Silencer, a being who fed on silence and sought to unweave the threads of song that bound worlds together. Karaz raised his hand, and the wind that had carried the melody stilled. The crystal bark trees shivered, their hum fading to a faint whisper. The child now keeper felt the rhythm in their chest falter, a tremor that threatened to unravel the tapestry they had woven. Yet from the center of the oasis, the water of the spring surged upward, forming a column of liquid light that pierced the darkness. Lyra lifted her flute, Azra strummed her lyre, Sarin inhaled the breath of the desert, and Nakla beat her drum with a steady pulse. The newcomer, her Shalamo glowing brighter, joined them, and together they forged a counter-melody, a chord of pure intention that resonated with the heart of the oasis. The sound was not merely heard, it was felt, a vibration that traveled through bone and sand alike, reaching the very core of Karaz's being. The silencer recoiled, his form cracking like brittle glass. With each note, the fissures widened, and the darkness began to dissolve into a cascade of silver droplets that fell like rain upon the oasis. The droplets merged with the spring, amplifying its glow until the entire grove was bathed in a radiant aurora that stretched across the sky, painting the night with ribbons of music. When the last echo faded, Kharez was no more, his presence replaced by a gentle hush that spoke of balance rather than void. The oasis breathed a sigh of relief, and the song rose once more, richer and more resilient than before. The keeper, now fully formed as a towering figure of light and water, placed a hand upon the child's shoulder. "The world will always test the song," the keeper said, "but as long as there are hearts willing to listen and voices ready to add their own verses, the melody will endure." The child looked around at the gathered companions, old friends, new allies and strangers whose paths had converged here, and felt a surge of purpose. They lifted their flute, and the first note they played was not a call for aid, but a promise that the oasis, the desert, the stars, and every soul touched by the music would forever be bound by a harmony that could never be silenced. The note lingered in the night air, a golden thread that stretched beyond the dunes and slipped into the constellations above. From the oasis, a soft wind gathered the melody and carried it across the endless sands, finding its way into distant villages, bustling market towns, and the vaulted halls of distant citadels. Wherever it touched, ears opened and hearts remembered the rhythm that once seemed forgotten, and with each recollection the song grew stronger, a living lattice of sound that bound the world together. Lyra, her flute now humming with the promise she had set, turned to the keeper and whispered, "We must walk the pathways the music has opened, lest the silence find new cracks to seep through." The keeper's luminous form rippled, and water droplets fell from his shoulders like tiny stars, each one landing on the sand and blooming into a blossom of crystal bark that sang when the breeze brushed its leaves. With a nod, he summoned a caravan of those who had answered the call, cartographers whose maps now pulsed with melodic lines, healers whose chants could coax life from wilted roots, poets whose verses resonated like bells, and the newcomer whose chalumeau glowed with a steady, amber fire. They set out at dawn, the oasis receding behind them as a shimmering mirage of light. The desert, once a vast expanse of indifferent silence, now thrummed with a low, steady hum that seemed to rise from the very grains of sand. As they trekked, the caravan encountered a settlement perched on the edge of a canyon, its people living in stone houses that echoed with the mournful sighs of wind through narrow passages. The inhabitants had long ago learned to mute their voices, fearing the wrath of a forgotten deity who fed on the resonance of joy. When the caravan arrived, the child keeper lifted the flute once more, and the first breath of the instrument coaxed a gentle chord that slipped into the canyon's crevices. The stone walls responded, vibrating with a resonance that awakened dormant resonators hidden within the rock. From the depths emerged a choir of crystalline voices, each tone pure and bright, weaving themselves into the child's melody. The people of the canyon felt the weight of centuries of silence lift, replaced by a chorus that filled their homes with light. In gratitude, they offered the travelers a map etched in sand glass, its lines shifting with each pulse of the song, pointing toward a hidden valley where the heart of the world lay, a wellspring said to amplify any melody to the scale of continents. Guided by the living map, the caravan pressed onward, crossing dunes that sang under their feet and oases that reflected constellations not yet named. Along the way, they encountered a troop of nomads whose drums beat in perfect counterpoint to the wind, creating a rhythm that seemed to stitch the sky to the earth. Together they forged a procession that moved like a river of sound, each step a measure, each breath a phrase. The desert itself seemed to lean in, its dunes reshaping to form arches that amplified the music, turning the landscape into a grand organ. When they finally reached the concealed valley, they found a basin of water so clear it mirrored the heavens, its surface rippling with a frequency that resonated deep within every listener's marrow. The keeper stepped forward, extending a hand that glowed brighter than the sun at noon, and placed it upon the water's edge. As his fingertips brushed the liquid, the basin erupted in a cascade of luminous notes that rose like a phoenix, spiraling upward and spilling into the sky. The chorus of all who had traveled with him, flutes, lyres, drums, chalumeaus, and even the silent breaths of the desert, joined in a unified hymn that stretched beyond the horizon. The hymn did not merely travel, it transformed. In distant kingdoms, walls that had once been mute began to echo with the distant hum, reminding rulers of the power of harmony. In forests, trees whose leaves had fallen silent sprouted new buds that sang with the wind. Even the remnants of Karaz's void, those lingering shadows that clung to forgotten corners, quivered and dissolved into motes of light, each one joining the ever-growing chorus. As the final chord faded into a gentle, perpetual resonance, the child keeper lowered the flute, eyes shining with tears of gratitude and resolve. "The song is never finished," they said softly. "It only grows as long as we keep listening, keep adding, and keep protecting the spaces where silence might try to creep back." Around them, the valley thrummed with life, a living testament that a single promise, once voiced, could ripple outward to bind worlds, and that the melody of hope would forever outshine any darkness that dared to rise. The child keeper bowed to the keeper of the shadows, feeling the cool weight of destiny settle upon their shoulders. "Teach me what must be done," they whispered, and the woman's hand brushed the surface of the basin, drawing a thin line of light that traced a map across the water's skin. It was not a map of places, but of frequencies, a lattice of notes that could pierce the lingering voids, each point a chord that, when struck, would seal a fissure before it could swallow another song. Together they gathered a small cadre, the nomadic drummers whose skin-tight frames resonated with the wind, a pair of lyre players from the canyon whose strings sang in harmonics unseen, and an elder from the oasis whose voice could coax water from stone. Each carried an instrument tuned to a specific interval of the lattice, a fragment of the larger harmony they now sought to weave. Their first destination lay beyond the dunes, in the ashen plains where the sky was perpetually bruised with storm clouds, and the ground exhaled ash like a dying beast. Legend spoke of a cavern there, the Maw of Echoes, where Karaz's remnants had coalesced into a vortex that devoured sound. As they entered the plain, The drums began a low, steady pulse that seemed to push the ash aside, forming a path of trembling earth. The child keeper lifted the flute, its silver shaft catching the dim light, and played a single, sustained note that rose like a thread of sunrise through the gloom. The note struck the cavern's mouth, and the vortex shivered. From its depths emerged a low, mournful hum, a counter-melody that threatened to drown the child keeper's tone. The lyre players answered in kind, their strings vibrating at a perfect fifth, weaving a lattice that wrapped around the vortex like a net of light. The drummers intensified, their skins beating in syncopated rhythm, each strike a hammer forging a seal. Slowly, the vortex's roar softened, its edges smoothing into a quiet resonance that blended with the caravan's song. When the echo finally fell silent, a crystal formed at the heart of the cavern, pulsing with a soft blue glow. The keeper of the shadows reached out, her fingers brushing the crystal, and a ripple of shadow lifted, scattering like ink in water. "One fragment secured," she said, her voice steadier now. "But the darkness spreads like a tide. We must move to the whispering forest, where the trees have forgotten their own voices." The journey to the forest was a procession of sound. The oasis elder sang to the wind, coaxing it to carry them over a jagged ridge where the air grew thin, and the stars seemed close enough to touch. At night, the caravan camped beneath a canopy of ancient boughs, their leaves trembling with anticipation. When they entered the forest, they found it hushed, the usual chorus of rustling leaves and bird calls replaced by a heavy, oppressive silence that pressed against their ears. The child keeper lifted the flute once more, but this time the breath was different, filled with the memory of every song they had gathered so far. The note unfurled like a ribbon of light, slipping between trunks and finding the heart of the forest, a massive, gnarled tree whose bark was etched with runes of forgotten lullabies. From its core emanated a low, throbbing pulse, the echo of the void that had stolen the forest's song. The lyre players placed their instruments against the tree's roots, their strings resonating at a harmonic that matched the tree's own frequency. The drummers beat a rhythm that mimicked the heartbeat of the earth, while the elder's voice rose in a chant that called the wind to remember its role. As the combined music swelled, the runes glowed, and the tree began to sing, a deep, resonant tone that rose through the canopy, awakening the leaves. One by one, the foliage responded, each leaf adding its own timbre, until the forest became a living organ, its branches swaying in perfect counterpoint to the caravan's melody. From the center of the tree, a shard of amber light fell, solidifying into a second crystal. The keeper of the shadows gathered it, feeling the darkness recede a fraction more. "Two fragments," she murmured, "and the lattice grows stronger." Yet the final chord lies beyond the seas, in the city of glass where the last echo of Kharaz still lingers, hidden beneath the mirrored towers. With the forest song now restored, the caravan set sail on a vessel woven from reeds and reinforced with the resonant chords of the desert drums. The water itself seemed to hum, guiding them toward the distant city. As they approached the glittering spires, The air grew crisp, and the reflected light fractured into a kaleidoscope of colors that danced to an unseen rhythm. At the city's gates, they were met by silent sentinels, statues of stone that once guarded the city's knowledge but now stood mute, their eyes dimmed by the lingering void. The child keeper raised the flute, and a single bright trill cut through the stillness, striking the statue's cores. Cracks of light spread across their surfaces, and the statues awoke, their voices joining the chorus in a chorus of stone and glass. Inside the city's grand hall, beneath a vaulted ceiling of mirrored panels, lay the final void, a vortex of darkness swirling at the center of a marble floor, its edges humming with a low, discordant tone. The caravan formed a circle around it, each instrument tuned to the exact frequency needed to bind the vortex. The keeper of the shadows stepped forward, her own shadow merging with the darkness, and sang a note of pure, unyielding resolve. The child keeper's flute sang in perfect harmony, the lyres added bright overtones, the drums provided a steady pulse, and the elder's voice wove a binding chant. The vortex shuddered, its chaotic swirl tightening into a tight coil. With a final, resonant chord, the darkness collapsed into a sphere of crystal, identical to the ones they had gathered before, but pulsing with a deeper, more complex harmony. The keeper of the shadows lifted the crystal, and its light spread outward, sealing the void and sealing the song into the very foundations of the city of glass. As the last reverberation faded, the mirrored walls reflected a new image, a world where every corner, every breath, every heartbeat carried a thread of the song. The child keeper looked to the horizon, where the first light of dawn painted the sky in hues of gold and violet. Their journey was far from over, but the lattice was now whole, and with each step forward, the melody of hope would continue to grow, binding the realms together against any silence that might dare to return. The caravan slipped from the mirrored streets as the sunrise stretched its golden fingers across the sea, turning the water into a ribbon of liquid amber. The reeds of their vessel sang beneath their feet, each strand humming in sympathy with the crystal's pulse, and the wind carried the faint echo of the city's song far beyond the glass towers. Ahead, a mist rose from the horizon, coalescing into a shape that seemed both wave and wall, a barrier of silence that the old maps had marked only as the quiet maw. The keeper of the shadows lifted the crystal to the mist, and its light pierced the veil, scattering shards of sound like droplets of rain. From within the fog emerged a choir of unseen voices, each a fragment of a forgotten melody, trembling on the edge of oblivion. The child keeper raised her flute once more, and the note that rose was not a simple trill but a question, a yearning that reached into the heart of the silence. The quiet maw answered, with a low, resonant hum that vibrated the hull of the reed boat. It was a chord of loss, a reminder of the places where the lattice had never been woven. The keeper felt the familiar tug of darkness at the edge of her own shadow, but this time it was not a threat, it was a plea. "We have bound the void in glass," the hush seemed to say, "but there are still places where the song has never been heard, where the world still trembles in mute." Guided by that unspoken request, the caravan altered its course, steering toward a cluster of islands that rose like pearls from the sea's surface. The islands were known in legend as the Echo Isles, each one a repository of a single, pure tone that had been scattered when the world first sang. As they drew near, the air grew thick with the scent of salt and old incense, and the reeds beneath their feet thrummed with anticipation. On the largest isle, a stone amphitheater stood half buried in sand, its arches etched with runes that glowed faintly in the morning light. At its center lay a pedestal of obsidian, upon which rested a single, uncut crystal, dull and dark, yet humming with a potential that resonated with the keeper's own. She stepped forward, feeling the lattice of the song tighten around her, and placed the three crystals from glass beside the obsidian stone. The moment they touched, the dark crystal fractured, releasing a cascade of silvery notes that spiraled upward, weaving themselves into the lattice like new threads. The child keeper lifted her flute, and this time the melody that poured from her was not a single line, but a tapestry of interlacing motifs, each echoing the tones of the islands she had never known. The lyre's strings sang the low, resonant hum of the maw, the drums beat the steady pulse of the sea, and the elder's voice added a chant that bound the new notes to the old. As the music swelled, the obsidian pedestal dissolved into a pool of liquid light, and from its depths rose a fourth crystal, brighter than any before, its facets catching the sunrise and scattering it into a spectrum of unheard colors. The keeper of the shadows cradled the new crystal, feeling its weight not as darkness but as possibility. "The lattice is growing," she whispered, "and with each fragment we restore, the world remembers its own voice." Around them, the amphitheater's stone walls vibrated, and the sand beneath their feet lifted, forming a swirling vortex of light that lifted the caravan into the air. They rose above the islands, the song of the lattice echoing through the sky, and as they ascended, the horizon unfolded into a tapestry of realms, forests still shrouded in silence, deserts whose dunes sang only when the wind passed, and mountains whose peaks held the echo of a forgotten chord. The child keeper looked out over this expanding tapestry, her eyes reflecting the myriad colors of the new crystal. She knew that each realm would demand its own note, its own harmony, and that the journey would never truly end. Yet the melody that now bound them was no longer a fragile thread but a living river, carrying them forward with purpose. With a final, shared breath, the caravan set its course toward the next silent valley, ready to plant the next seed of song and let the lattice of hope stretch ever wider across the world. The caravan drifted on the wind-woven river of song, the new crystal cradled like a sunrise in the keeper's palm. Below, the silent valley unfolded, a basin of pale stone and glassy pools, its edges rimmed with ancient trees whose bark was etched with glyphs that had not felt vibration in ages. A thin veil of mist clung to the ground, each droplet trembling as if waiting for a breath to set it trembling. When the caravan finally descended, the air itself seemed to hold its exhale. The child keeper stepped onto the valley floor, feeling the lattice thin to a whisper beneath her feet. She raised the flute, but the first note fell flat, swallowed by the hush that pressed against her skin. The crystal in her other hand pulsed faintly, a dim heartbeat that mirrored the dormant chord hidden in the valley's heart. From the shadows of the stone walls emerged a figure cloaked in woven reeds, its eyes twin pools of still water. It was the guardian of the quiet, a being formed from the valley's own forgotten resonance. "You come bearing a fragment of the world's song," it said, voice a soft rustle of leaves. "But this place has not known harmony for 1,000 cycles. To awaken it, you must first hear the silence within yourself." The child keeper closed her eyes, letting the lattice's faint hum settle into her marrow. She felt the weight of every note she had gathered: Maw's low hum, the sea's steady pulse, the desert's wind-kissed chord, converge into a single, steady breath. When she opened her eyes, the crystal glowed brighter, its facets catching the dim light and scattering it into a cascade of unseen colors that painted the mist with fleeting rainbows. She lifted the flute again, this time allowing the crystal's light to guide her breath. The melody that rose was not a single line, but a chord built of all the fragments she had gathered, each voice supporting the other, weaving a tapestry that stretched across the valley like a living bridge. The guardian of the quiet stepped forward, its reed-woven form shimmering as the music brushed against it. With each phrase, the stone walls began to vibrate, the glyphs igniting with soft amber fire, and the pools of water rippled in time with the rhythm. As the song reached its apex, the valley itself answered. From the deepest fissure, a low, resonant tone emerged, a note that had lain dormant, the valley's own voice, pure and unbroken. It rose, joined the chorus, and the lattice swelled, its threads thickening into a luminous web that stretched from the valley to the distant horizons the caravan had already crossed. The crystal in the keeper's hand cracked open, releasing a spray of silvery light that settled over the valley like fresh snow, sealing the new chord into the earth. The guardian bowed its head, the reeds rustling like applause. "You have given us our song," it whispered, and the mist lifted, revealing a sky painted with the colors of the crystal's spectrum. Birds of feathered light took wing, their wings beating in perfect sync with the newly awakened chord, and the valley filled with a harmony that resonated through the lattice, echoing back to the distant forests, deserts, and mountains. The caravan gathered once more, the child keeper's flute now humming with the valley's tone, the lyre's strings resonating with the echo of stone, and the elder's chant weaving the new note into the ever-growing tapestry. With the lattice strengthened, they turned their gaze toward the next horizon, a canyon where the wind sang only when the moon rose, its silence waiting for a seed of song. The journey continued, each step a promise that the world's voice would never again be lost to mute. The caravan slipped into the canyon's mouth as the last ember of sunset bled into the stone, and the lattice that trailed behind them pulsed with a soft, amber glow, its threads humming in sympathy with the child keeper's flute. The air grew cooler, the wind curling around the sheer cliffs like a living thing, its breath thin and hesitant, waiting for the moon's call. When the moon finally rose, a silver disk that seemed to pour liquid light over the canyon walls, the wind changed. It rose in a steady, mournful sigh that rose and fell in perfect intervals, as if the canyon itself were inhaling and exhaling a forgotten song. The child keeper lifted her flute to her lips, feeling the moonlight settle on the instrument's silver filigree, turning each note into a filament of pale luminescence. She began to play a slow, descending scale, each tone a droplet of moon-kissed water falling into the canyon's deep throat. From the far side of the gorge, a figure emerged, tall, cloaked in midnight blue fabrics that fluttered like the night sky itself. Its eyes glowed with the same argent hue as the moon, and from its shoulders unfurled a pair of wings made of translucent, wind-woven fibers that caught the lunar light and refracted it into a cascade of soft chimes. The being was the guardian of the moonwind, a keeper of the canyon's nocturnal chorus. "You have come with the valley's song," the guardian whispered, voice a blend of rustling reeds and distant night birds. "Now hear the silence that lies between the wind's verses. Only when the space is filled can the canyon's true voice rise." The elder stepped forward, his chant deepening, resonating with the lattice's core. He sang of the moon's journey across the heavens, of tides that rise and fall, of the ancient pact between sky and stone. The lyre's strings vibrated in response, each pluck a bright spark that danced along the lattice's threads, weaving moonlight into the web. As the music swelled, the canyon walls began to tremble. Hidden fissures glowed with a pale, phosphorescent sheen, and from them seeped a thin mist that rose like breath. Within the mist, faint shapes coalesced, echoes of past travelers, their silhouettes formed of pure sound, each one a note waiting to be released. The child keeper felt the lattice's tension, a tightrope of resonance stretched between the valley's memory and the canyon's yearning. She altered her melody, weaving a counter rhythm that slipped between the wind's sighs, a silent pause that held the promise of a note yet to be sung. The guardian of the moonwind lifted its wings, and the wind responded, filling the pause with a resonant hum that vibrated through the stone, awakening a deep, resonant chord that had lain dormant for eons. The canyon answered with a roar that was both thunder and song, a low, sonorous tone that rolled down the gorge like a tide of sound. The lattice flared, its threads thickening into ribbons of light that spiraled upward, connecting the moonlit sky to the deepest fissure. The crystal the child keeper still cradled cracked open once more, spilling a cascade of silvery particles that settled on the canyon floor, each one a seed of melody. As they touched the stone, the particles burst into tiny, glowing orbs that floated upward, joining the moon's light and the wind's song in a luminous vortex. In that vortex, the child keeper saw a vision, a river of music flowing from the valley through the canyon and onward to the distant mountains, where a choir of stone giants awaited their turn to add their deep, resonant voices. She understood that the canyon was not an end but a conduit, a place where the world's song could be stretched, bent, and amplified. When the final chord faded, the canyon fell into a hushed reverence. The wind, now fully awakened, sang a steady, melodic hum that lingered in the night air, a lullaby for the moon and for all who would travel this path. The guardian of the moonwind bowed its head, its wings rustling like distant chimes, and placed a single feather of moonlight upon the child keeper's flute. "Carry this," it said, "so that wherever you go, the night may find its voice." The caravan turned back toward the lattice, their steps lighter, their hearts resonating with the canyon's newly forged chord. Behind them, the moon rose higher, casting silver pathways across the desert sands, guiding them toward the next horizon, a forest where the trees whispered in ancient harmonies, waiting for the seed of song that the child keeper now bore. The child keeper felt the feather's cool luminescence pulse against the wood of her flute, as if the moon itself were breathing through the instrument. With each step deeper into the emerald cathedral, the forest song grew richer, layers of rustling leaves, distant bird calls, and the low hum of unseen insects weaving a tapestry of sound that seemed to echo the canyon's final chord. The caravan slowed, allowing the music to settle around them, and the elders began to chant in low, resonant tones, matching the rhythm of the trees. A narrow path of moss-covered stones opened onto a clearing where a crystal pool lay still, its surface reflecting the canopy like a polished mirror. At its center rose a solitary birch, its bark etched with runes that glowed faintly in the moonlit feather's glow. The child keeper approached, her flute raised, and let the feather's light cascade over the water. As the silvered particles fell, the pool rippled, and from its depths emerged a chorus of translucent voices, ancient spirits of the forest, each tone a fragment of forgotten lullabies. "Welcome, keeper of the moon's song," the voices sang in unison, their harmony resonating with the lattice of the canyon and the wind's lingering hum. "You have carried the seed of melody across stone and sand. Now the forest asks for its own verse, a bridge between earth and sky." The birch's runes flared, and a slender vine unfurled, wrapping itself around the child keeper's wrist. Its tendrils were warm, and within them thrummed a new motif, a low, resonant pulse that seemed to draw the very heartbeat of the woods. She lifted her flute and, guided by the vine's rhythm, began a new melody, slow, deliberate, like the growth of a tree from seed to towering giant. The notes rose and fell, each one coaxing a different part of the forest to respond. The pine needles shivered, releasing a fine, sparkling dust that drifted upward, joining the feather's light in a swirling vortex above the pool. The vortex spun faster, pulling threads of sound from the canyon, the moonwind, and now the forest itself, weaving them into a single, luminous filament that stretched toward the horizon. Beyond the tree line, the silhouette of distant mountains loomed, their peaks crowned with ancient stone giants that had waited for the canyon's call. The filament reached them, and the giants' stone throats opened, emitting deep, resonant tones that reverberated through the valley. The caravan felt the ground tremble with the giants' song, a bass line that anchored the soaring melodies above. In response, the child keeper's flute sang a bright, crystalline counterpoint, the feather's moonlight flaring brighter with each phrase. The convergence of these three great voices, canyon, forest, and mountain, created a harmonic convergence that lifted the night sky. Stars flickered in time with the music, and the moon, now a full silver disk, seemed to pulse in sync with the chorus. The child keeper understood that the world's song was no longer a line, but a circle, each realm feeding the other, each note a promise of renewal. As the final chord of this grand symphony faded, the forest exhaled. The birch's runes dimmed, the vine gently released its hold, and the crystal pool settled into a glassy calm, reflecting the newly woven tapestry of light. The caravan, their hearts now bound to the living music of the world, turned once more, this time toward the mountains, where the stone giants awaited their turn to add the next verse. The feather of moonlight rested lightly on the child keeper's flute, a reminder that wherever she traveled, night would always find its voice, and the song would continue, ever expanding, ever alive.